Hello, my name's Nigel Thorne, and I'm concerned about the values that are being taught to young children as part of the relationships and sexuality education in Wales. The architects of the code and guidance are Professor E.J. Renold from Cardiff University and Dr. Ester McGeeney from the University of Sussex. Dr. Ester McGeeney has been hugely influenced by the work of Michel Foucault, who in turn was influenced by the work of German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Professor Renold has been hugely influenced by the work of Judith Butler, who in turn was influenced by both Foucault and Nietzsche. Nietzsche was perhaps the first existentialist philosopher. He repudiated social values and is famous for his phrase, "God is dead." Giles Fraser writes, "If God walked into the room, Nietzsche would stab him. For his God is dead revelation is that humanity can only become free if it rejects the idea of the divine." Christianity is not a mistake. It is a wickedness dressed up as a virtue. Nietzsche himself was raised in an overly pious religious household, and on the death of his father, who was the local pastor, Nietzsche was brought up to fill his father's shoes. But all this weight of expectation was profoundly claustrophobic, and so it was almost inevitable that rejecting God came as a great release. Nietzsche's case against Christianity was that it kept people down, that it smothered them with morality and self-loathing. His ideal human is one who is free to express himself, like a great artist or a Viking warrior. Morality is for the little people. It's the way the weak manipulate the strong. The people Nietzsche most admired and aspired to be like were those who were able to reinvent themselves through some tremendous act of will. His ethics, if one can call them that, are founded on the admiration of power as the ultimate form of abundant creativity. His hatred of Christianity comes mostly from his hatred of renunciation and the promotion of selflessness. In a video titled Friedrich Nietzsche, How to Find Yourself, the narrator lists 4 steps.
One of the most important questions of our lives, of our history of human creativity, of philosophy, is how we can find ourselves, how we define our values, and how ultimately we can find meaning in our lives. In order to answer such questions, we dive deep into the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche, who is considered one of the greatest thinkers of all time and a precursor of existentialism. He was famously known for his unconventional ideas about morality and religion, and in spite of his controversial work, he proved to be a very deep thinker, showing great insights into the true nature of human psychology, writing guidelines relating to how individuals can shape their future by taking responsibility for who they are. Nietzsche wrote several books, and his teachings have shaped the lives of many people, from psychologists to poets, dancers to social revolutionaries. According to Nietzsche, finding yourself is one of the most fundamental endeavors of your life. And so, here are 4 steps inspired by the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche, which you can take from to help you get closer to finding yourself and becoming who you truly want to become. Number 1. Don't follow the herd mentality. Nietzsche says, "What we've called universal values, what we've called truth, has always only ever been the personal expressions of those who promoted them." Nietzsche believed a rigid societal code creates what he called the herd mentality. Like a herd of animals, a herd mentality aims towards sameness, comfort, and the preservation of its population. Similarly, the moral code of society has been fabricated by other individuals and then imposed on other people, so that society can have control over human behavior. Although that can protect us from certain extreme human behaviors, it also limits our individuality and creativity. Number 2. Embrace the difficulty of self-discovery. In the words of Nietzsche, No price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. Our instinctive and intuitive reaction is to evade all pain and suffering. The technology and the easiness of achieving everything has made us ungrateful, and we've forgotten that suffering is an integral part of life. However, according to Nietzsche, it's only when we're willing to face the challenges of life that we are spiritually growing. In 1873, when he was 29 years old, Nietzsche addressed this fundamental question of how we find ourselves in a beautiful essay titled Schopenhauer as Educator. In this essay, he argued that if someone wishes to be somebody in this life, to maximize their potential, they need to take the difficult path, which often leads to isolation. Being a loner is not easy. But this is one of the prices someone must pay for the privilege of owning themselves. To keep yourself from being overwhelmed by the tribe, you must distance yourself from others. You need to strive to be free, and this might lead to severe difficulties in your life. You should refuse taking an easy path, and you should decide to embark in the quest for gaining your freedom to be yourself, no matter how frightening it might be. Number 3. Say yes to what gives you meaning. To quote Nietzsche, "He who has a why can bear almost any how." Nietzsche's philosophy proposes that we say yes to whatever gives us meaning in our own lives, the things we find value in personally. In ages past, the meaning of everything was assured by God. However, according to Nietzsche, in an increasingly secular and scientific society, one can no longer turn to religion to find meaning. He found this concerning, as the typical person would be driven to nihilism, meaning general apathy and an unwillingness to find meaning in life without Number 4. Find your true values. Nietzsche asks us, what if some day or night a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness and say to you, "This life, as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more"? Would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke thus? Nietzsche believed that we need to create our own values to lift the greatest weight. The greatest weight is a metaphorical situation put forth by Nietzsche, which represents the feeling that crushes you into repeating past mistakes because of the unevaluated values you adopt from your herd. The goal of this concept is to make you ask yourself, is what you're doing truly meaningful, or are you just acting out of what your herd thinks is right? If you think that the things you are doing are worth repeating eternally, that you can be sure you are fully individuated, you will have enough courage and strength to lift the greatest weight. If you don't think that the way you've been living is worth repeating innumerably, chances are you haven't formed your own values, and you are still a slave to your society, and worse yet, a slave to yourself.
So the message to be taken away from Nietzsche is to be a loner, to separate yourself from the herd and to derive your own values. Following Nietzsche, neither Michel Foucault nor Judith Butler were too interested in objective truth. Foucault was criticised by historians for his use of history. Butler changed the definition of gender to allow people to have agency. Kelly Harris is Business and Participation Lead for Brook Cymru, Youth Work Implementation Board Member for the Welsh Government, and the Advisory Panel Chair for the Children's Commissioner for Wales. She is a young woman who is unlikely to be aware of the philosophical underpinnings of the material she is teaching. Nevertheless, what she is teaching is dangerous and needs to be challenged. In May 2021, the Welsh Government published a consultation document. Under a section titled Pluralistic Requirement, the document stated, "The law already requires that RSE must be objective, critical and pluralistic as to its content and manner of teaching. The Act does not change that legal position. By pluralistic, we mean that where questions of values are concerned, it must not seek to indoctrinate to a particular view, but instead should provide a range of views on a given subject. This means that, in practice, all schools and settings must teach RSE in a neutral, factual way. Where questions of values arise, they must present learners with different perspectives on a range of views on issues commonly held within society. In relation to this matter, during a Children, Young People and Education Committee meeting in October 2020, Harris stated,
briefly, and I'm afraid it's going to have to be the last contribution.
No problems. I will be brief, I promise. But I think what's really important about the objectivity and the pluralistic side of things is about making sure that the matters of fact, that they're verifiable, that they need to be distinguished between what's a matter of belief or a personal opinion. And also then that actually, you know, we can have conversations and we want our young people to be critical thinkers. But ultimately, you know, we need to ensure that the conversations are safe and that it's not just a case of anything goes, because all voices aren't equal, because they, you know, we have the Equalities Act for that. So it's just about ensuring, as we said earlier, that you've got reputable information, you've got correct information that's usable, that's reliable, and is, you know, is factually right, to be able to ensure then that the curriculum is delivered to the highest of possible standards, to ensure that objectivity is there.
Harris stated, I think what's really important about the objectivity and the pluralistic side of things is about making sure that they're matters of fact, that they're verifiable, and they need to be distinguished from what's a matter of belief or personal opinion. On the Brook website, a question is posed. What is the difference between sex and gender? Gender and sex are two very separate terms, despite people commonly thinking they mean the same thing. Learn about the difference between gender and sex. People commonly think they mean the same thing because, as defined in the Oxford English Dictionary, it has been used that way for over 100 years. This is one of two definitions of gender that relates to humans that is in the Oxford English Dictionary. The other is the sociological definition. Gender is the state of being male or female as expressed by social or cultural distinctions and differences rather than biological ones. It is in this definition that gender refers to the social stereotypes associated with a particular sex. And these two definitions can both be used happily, the meaning of the word gender being derived from the context in which it is used. In 1990, Judith Butler's work Gender Trouble was published. Butler believes that the word gender can be used to give people agency or freedom, so as to undermine the social stereotypes that are associated with being a particular sex.
It's my view that gender is culturally formed, but it's also a domain of agency or freedom.
So, following Nietzsche's admiration of those who reinvent themselves through some tremendous act of will, Butler claims that gender identity is created as a result of performing a gender. This new definition cannot be used simultaneously with the definition where gender is a synonym for sex. These are mutually incompatible definitions. Brook are using Judith Butler's definition of gender. On the Brook website, the question is put, what is gender identity? Gender identity means ideas about behaviour, actions and roles in relation to masculinity and femininity. The way you feel about your gender is called your gender identity. So following Judith Butler, gender identity is defined as how you feel about your gender. As Jay Stewart, CEO of Gendered Intelligence, claims, he is a man because he felt masculine.
I am a trans man, which means I was assigned female at birth, raised as a girl, and then later on in my mid-20s, I came to a kind of a realisation that I felt more masculine and that actually the word man was more applicable to me.
Stewart made the existential choice to separate himself from the herd and derive his own values. Now, it's difficult to reconcile the definitions of gender and gender identity on the Brook website with Harris's claim Harris further states, "We want our young people to be critical thinkers, but ultimately we need to ensure that the conversations are safe. And it's not just a case of anything goes, because all voices aren't equal. We have the Equality Act 2010 for that. The Equality Act 2010 does not restrict free speech. Gender-critical beliefs are protected in law. She cannot claim to champion critical thinking whilst simultaneously insisting that conversations are safe." Kelly Harris is a great admirer of Professor E.J. Renold. She is very active teaching children about gender and sexuality, or training teachers on the RSE code and the whole school approach. And Brook Cymru have won the contract to provide teacher training on RSE to teachers within the Central South Consortium. She sees no legitimacy in the concerns raised by parents on the teaching of queer theory in schools. Born from a philosophy that was created as a reaction to a moral authoritarianism, queer theory is manifestly an antisocial movement. Far from being inclusive, queer theory divides people between Nietzsche's herd and those who separate themselves from their herd to pursue their own path and find their own values. People who call themselves queer are positioning themselves as an alternative to the normal. There is no objectively queer person. There are narcissists who want people to think of them as special, and vulnerable young people who want to be acknowledged. Far from being condemned, this idea is being indulged. Pronoun badges are sold at the Earth Festival, and Jeremy Miles and Kelly Harris are in full agreement with this. Christianity in Wales dates from at least the 4th century, and its influence has significantly shaped the country's history. The reason Christianity has proven to be so influential is that Scripture provides readings that impart lessons to help us understand issues in our current times. Reflections on Gospel readings can help shine a light on what is a moral course of action. One such reading in the Gospel of Mark, regarded by most biblical scholars as the earliest Gospel, is the story of Jairus' daughter and the healing of the woman with the hemorrhage. This reading is found in Mark chapter 5, verses 21 to 43. These healing miracles are interlinked. They tell us that the stories share the same theme. The Gospel stories are allegories, and the passages do need interpretation. Every ailment referenced in the Gospel represents a psychological state. So Jairus pleads with Jesus, representing divine or universal reason, to help his daughter, who is dying. Psychotherapist Stella O'Malley explains how she came to set up GenSpect, an international alliance of professionals, trans people, detransitioners, parent groups and others who seek high-quality care for gender-related distress.
Hi there. The reason why we set it up was, it was really a COVID story. I was working hard as a psychotherapist, and I was getting an awful lot of contact from parents and from different people from the kind of gender world, mostly people who are distressed. I'm a psychotherapist, so mostly distressed people come to me. And it was quite noticeable how many parents were coming to me who were not being listened to, who were dismissed, very often by people who should have known better and should have been kind of liaising with the parents, because it's very well known fact for anybody who works with children that if at all possible, you try to keep the bond with the parents, and you try to keep a kind of a family and, the social services working together.
Jesus went with him, but is interrupted by a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. In Judaism at that time, a menstruating woman was regarded as unclean and was expected to separate from the community. So the interpretation of this story is that it is a story about someone who separates themselves from others, from the herd. The woman had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. The woman touched Jesus and her bleeding stopped. A judgmental attitude toward the social body can lead to feelings of alienation, an alienation that can be alleviated by human touch. After submissively falling before Jesus and telling her whole story, the woman is blessed and sent on her way. The story is about commitment to the social body. Trans man Scott Nugent explains why he is campaigning to stop the medicalisation of children.
I never fit. I was an alpha female, a sales executive that kind of just didn't fit in any box. When psychologists or somebody that I was in love with or whatever said that I was in the wrong body, I started to think, well, maybe I am. I'm a biological woman that medically transitioned to appear like a male through synthetic hormones and surgery. I will never be a man. Is it transphobic for me to tell the truth? Why is it that a couple hundred years from now, if you dug up my body, they're gonna go, yeah, that was a woman, had babies.
Can you tell me about the procedures that you had?
I've had 7 surgeries. I've had 1 stress heart attack. I've had a helicopter life ride with a pulmonary embolism. I've had 17 rounds of antibiotics. I had 6 inches of hair on the inside of my urethra for 17 months. Nobody would help me, including the doctor that did this to me because I lost my insurance. I get infections every 3 to 4 months. I'm probably not gonna live very long.
Was there any real discussion of the risks and the side effects and...
No, there's not. And I know that people want to think that there is, but there's not. The truth is that medical transition is experimental. We have studies that said that medical transition helps mental health with kids. They've all been retracted, modified, changed. But the only long-term study tells us 7 to 10 years is when transgender people are the most suicidal.
After?
After surgery. But that's transphobic to say. For the first time in history, a marginalized group has a huge dollar sign on the top of their head. We have 5 children's hospitals in the United States promoting that.
What?
That's a phalloplasty. That's a bottom surgery. We have 5 children's hospitals in the United States telling girls that they can be boys at $70,000 a pop in a surgery that has a 67% complication rate. That will kill me from infection, that I can't sue on. We're butchering a generation of children because nobody's willing to talk about anything. I have 3 kids. At the age that they're doing this to kids. I'm not transphobic. I love my kids, and I love other people's kids, and you should too. This is wrong on so many levels.
Can kids consent? Do you think kids are capable of consenting to this?
No, they're not. Being a parent is loving the hell out of your kids and helping them see around corners.
Continuing the scripture reading, people come to Jesus and tell him that Jairus' daughter is dead. Mental health professional Miriam Grossman, explains the mental health toll that the transgender craze has put on parents.
What I was looking at my screen, at the grid of all the parents that were listening in. And I said to them that as a psychiatrist, I am acknowledging the ordeal, the terrible ordeal they're going through, and that they have experienced and are experiencing trauma. And when your daughter comes home and her voice has dropped and she's growing facial hair, that's traumatic. And when your son comes down the stairs to go to the prom, wearing a dress and heels and makeup, that's traumatic. And worse, of course, there's much worse than those things. When you learn that your daughter is scheduled to have a mastectomy, when you learn that your son is having genital surgery and their kids are going to be sterilized and you're not going to have grandchildren. These things are traumatic and they are losses. And I apologized on behalf, not that anyone from my profession chose me to speak for them, but I decided that I wanted to do that, and I apologized. And I looked at that grid, when you're doing a Zoom and there's a lot of people there, and I noticed that almost, more than half the cameras, 80% of the cameras were turned off. I could only see really a few faces. And at the time, I didn't know why that would have been. I thought maybe, they're in the kitchen or they're busy, or I really didn't know. And then I found out later on, Dr. Peterson, that their cameras were off because they were crying.
Uh-huh.
They were crying just to hear a professional, a mental health professional, say to them, yeah, you're traumatized. You are dealing with grief, with serious grief, just like the trauma of someone that went through a natural disaster or 9/11, just like the trauma of parents who are told their kid has cancer. No less than that. And in fact, more complicated than that, because your trauma and grief is not acknowledged. It's disenfranchised.
Jesus approached Jairus' home, and there was a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly.
Our rights are no debate! Our rights are no debate! Trans rights are human rights! Trans rights are human rights!
After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and went in to where the child was. He said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. By this, Jesus established the proper relationship with the child. He didn't ask, he didn't implore, he told her to get up. He then told them to give her something to eat. Young people can be easily influenced by others because they haven't yet developed the wisdom to allow them to identify unhealthy influences. It is the duty of the parent to remove those unhealthy influences from their children. The Welsh Government have made that impossible. In February 2023, the book Time to Think by Hannah Barnes was published. The book told the story of how influential lobby groups had compromised good clinical practice at GIDS, the UK's Gender Identity Service for Children. Almost all children seeking transition suffered from comorbid health conditions. In the Relationships and Sexuality Education Code and Guidance provided for Welsh schools, there is a massive emphasis on children's rights. This even comes at the expense of parents' rights. In May 2023, Andrew Bridgen MP asked a question of the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister agree that it's completely inappropriate for schools to encourage young people under the age of 18 to socially transition, for example, by changing their names and their pronouns? All this is going on without parental consent or even knowledge, in breach of parents' human rights. Will the Prime Minister instruct the Department of Education to order schools to stop indoctrinating our children and to concentrate on their duty of care to protect them?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've been very clear that when it comes to matters of sexual education and PHSC, it is absolutely right that schools are sensitive in how they teach those matters and that they should be done in an age-appropriate fashion. The Department for Education is currently reviewing the statutory guidance and curriculum that goes to schools so we can tackle this particular issue, because there have been cases raised with the government and others where this has not been the case. I don't think that's acceptable. We must protect our children, and that's what our new guidance will do.
A person by the name of Josh Harshant, quote, tweeted that tweet. Flagrant disregard of children's rights to free expression and self-formation of identity, all in the name of protection. Kelly Harris from Brook Cymru retweeted that tweet. Brook Cymru are training teachers and youth workers and teaching children in Wales. Those parents who have concerns about what their child will be taught in Welsh schools may wish to support Public Child Protection Wales. Links are included below.